One more time. I never know how to start these things. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K has the biggest name for the smallest camera. Coming in at 7 inches wide and 3.8 inches tall, while not exactly pocketable, it is small. Even more so when you compare it to its biggest competitors, Red and RE, which is something to take note of. This camera isn't competing with a Sony a7 or a Canon EOS R. Those are photo cameras that also do video pretty well. This is the cinema camera, and I'll go into a few of those differences a little later on. The Pocket shoots 4K in both DCI and UHD at speeds from 24 to 120 frames per second. For codecs, you can record in ProRes HQ, 422, LT, and Proxy, as well as Blackmagic RAW. It features both CFast and SD card slots, and the ability to record to an SSD via the USB-C port that's on the side. The 5-inch touchscreen makes changing the settings as easy as using a smartphone. There are no complicated menus here. But don't let the size fool you. Even though this looks like a DSLR, this camera punches way above its weight class. This camera is a cinema camera, and folks often like to compare cameras purely on price tag, but just because it's in the same price point as a mirrorless or a DSLR, that doesn't mean they're going to serve the same purpose. If you try to compare a Pocket to a photo camera, you will sadly be disappointed. There is no in-body stabilization, no continuous autofocus. The battery life, it's not great. But if you compare it side by side with a Red or an RE, you're going to find a lot of similarities, as cinema cameras typically don't have autofocus. If you need them to be stabilized, you're using a gimbal or a slider setup. They don't take stills, they use much bigger batteries, shooting much higher quality codecs, and they need a lot of accessories often to make them functional. At the time of writing this, the cheapest new Red camera you can get is the Dragon X 6K, and that's $14,950, which is all that money just gets you the brain. You still need to add a screen, a handle, a battery plate, a lens mount. Straight out of the box, Red really can't do much. And by the time you're done getting the camera just functional, you're looking at a price tag of about $20,000. The Pocket comes in around $1,300 plus you get a free copy of DaVinci Resolve Studio. It's a bargain. And while the cost difference is pretty massive, the cameras actually produce images that are very similar. The Pocket has 13 stops of dynamic range and features a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200. It shoots Blackmagic RAW, which is a fantastic codec in size and quality, but also shoots ProRes, which will perform wonderfully regardless of what editing platform you're working on. To compare, a mirrorless camera shoots 4K at about 100 megabits per second, while the Pocket shoots 100 megabytes per second in ProRes. That's almost 8 times more data that you're capturing, which means you can do more to those clips in color and effects without lowering the image quality. Plus, when you're shooting ProRes, you're going to get smoother playback in your NLE regardless of your platform, as the computer doesn't have to work as hard to read those files. This is going to give you a better editing experience and save you more time in post-production. Now look, I'm not saying you can't get a good picture with a mirrorless camera or you should toss out your DSLRs. Compression technology is constantly getting better and better, and you really can do a lot with pretty much any camera that's out there today. In fact, some of the B-roll in this very video that you're watching was shot with an iPhone, and an old iPhone at that. But Knowing the differences is the first step into making the right choices for your production. And for me, I can't justify owning a $20,000 RED camera. I want one, but I can't. But I want a higher quality codec and a better editing experience than I'm gonna get out of mirrorless. And the Blackmagic camera checks those boxes for me. On the top, there's a 1/4-20 mount for rigging and 3 custom function buttons. Shortcuts for ISO, shutter, white balance, a record, and a stills capture button. On the front, you have 2 onboard microphones, which are actually pretty good. I'm not sure I would depend on them for production audio, but in a pinch, they're better than most, and especially if it's just for reference audio. Most of the time though, I'm gonna leverage the 3.5mm jack that's on the side for a small shotgun or lavalier setup. This camera does have a mini XLR port which can be adapted to a full-size XLR port and provide phantom power should you want to run some better quality microphones directly to the camera and not have to deal with 2-system sound. On the back of the camera, there's an auto iris button, as well as a single shot autofocus button, which isn't the best. Autofocus on this camera is a bit of a mixed bag, and speaking personally, I often forget that that button's even there, and I just focus manually. Below that is a high frame rate button for slow motion effects, display zoom to check your focus, the camera menu button, and a clip playback to review your clips, which is great on the 5-inch touchscreen. Not only is it a nice viewing experience, but using the touchscreen to change settings on the camera makes it a breeze to set up. And once you get used to using a touchscreen and the Blackmagic user interface, going back to flicking a joystick around on another camera is gonna drive you crazy. Press the menu button and the first tab is record. This is where you can set your frame size and record quality. The next tab is monitor, and here you can configure the information you see both on screen and if you happen to have an external LCD connected. These are pretty straightforward, but it's worth noting there are more settings in the both tab, such as frame guides and focus peaking colors, so play around with those and set it to taste. The next tab is audio, and here you can assign 2 tracks of audio that get recorded into each clip. With the 3.5mm jack, you can record both left and right channels. The built-in camera microphones are also left and right. And the XLR is a single channel mono recording, but it does give you the option to record with either a microphone or a line input if you were recording from a mixer or a press box. The next tab is setup, where you can set the date and time, which you should check every once in a while to make sure it's accurate. For shutter measurements, I set it to shutter angle. This gives me a universal setting regardless of the frame rate that I'm at and keeps my motion blur consistent. I set it to 180 degrees at all times unless there's an effect that I'm going for. A swipe to the right shows the function buttons, and here you can customize what those 3 buttons on the top of the camera do. Each camera operator has their own wants and needs, but for me, I set mine to display LUT, focus assist, and grid for framing. But again, this is all your preference. The swipe to the right will show Bluetooth settings. This is very handy if you're using a mobile device to trigger record or change some settings on the camera. There's a few apps that do this, but I really enjoyed using Bluetooth Plus for Blackmagic the most. Now switching back to the camera side, you can see icons at the top and bottom of the screen displaying your current settings. From here, instead of going to the menus to change settings, you can touch the icons to make those adjustments. Pressing ISO button on the top of the camera or tapping the ISO icon on the screen will show you ISO controls. Now, this camera is a dual ISO camera, which means there are 2 gain switches for cleaner images, especially in low light. The lower range is 100 to 1000. The higher range is 1250 to 25,600. Now, the native ISO settings are 432, which means at those settings, you're gonna get the most dynamic range out of this sensor. So it's best to try to shoot as close to those 2 numbers as you can, and control light through either a lighting kit or a variable ND filter that's on your lens. For the price and the quality, the Blackmagic Pocket is really impressive. And for me, having a cinema camera that I can fit into my everyday carry, and I do carry it with me every day, just means I'm gonna shoot even more. They say the best camera is the one that you have on you, and at the end of the day, a camera that I use every single day is gonna be more valuable to me than a camera I only take out on special occasions. But that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. You're all wonderful people, and I will see you in the next one.